First Blood.
Welcome back to First Blood Speed Reviews. So today's review is How to Survive played through Steam. First off, does it work? Yes, it works perfectly fine. The game has a separate configuration outside of the game, which is a little irritating because if you want to actually change things like resolution, you have to exit the program. The options are mostly just for controls and things like key bindings, and honestly there's not really a lot of graphical options that there are to change anyway with the configuration tool, other than there's pretty much just resolution and VSync. Now the game starts out like most action RPGs. You're going to start out with interactive tutorials. As far as controls go, I found it really unpleasant actually play with keyboard and mouse. I'm not sure if the game was designed to be played with a controller to begin with, but it just works much better with a controller. It's a lot easier to play. That being said, it still works fine with the mouse and keyboard. I just felt it was sort of awkward, especially because I've played a lot of action RPGs, especially on computer, and usually keyboard and mouse is completely amazing, and this was not. Now, the other kind of tutorials you'll experience are going to be these little short video tutorials. They basically explain the major components of the game, and you'll find them as you get to the part where you need it. I'll go into the tutorial videos in depth a little bit later on. Now, the game itself is an action RPG slash survival game slash crafting game. It's pretty much just large zones or islands. Each island has sort of its own atmosphere or topography, so they don't all feel the same, but pretty much the major mechanics are all still there on each island, with things like you might find different plants growing on certain islands, and of course there are some side quests which are given to you by monkeys that use toucan sand to talk. Okay, anyway, for the most part, as far as I can tell, you're just playing through one long continuous major quest, and the way progression is set up is both your character has levels, and you choose a character between 3 different people with slightly different starting statistics, and honestly speaking, I didn't really find much of a difference between playing different characters, so it's really gonna just be a visual preference probably. So you have levels, which you accrue through normal experience gain from doing quests and from killing enemies, and that in turn raises your statistics automatically, but then also you're given a skill point every level, which you're allowed to put into a skill tree, and the skill tree is very simple compared to most games, but it does add a little bit of customization. It's almost more like Dying Light's skill tree if it was really simple. So in other words, it's not that you can't play the game without some of these skills, but the game becomes significantly easier once you do unlock skills. Now, the other aspect of progression is going to be your gear and your items. And for the most part, How to Survive stands separately from the pack in this regard, because actually, for the most part, you make all of your equipment. And in theory, this is totally awesome. Now, figuring out how to make certain gear is either going to be through you just randomly clicking on items in your inventory and trying to combine it with random junk, or you'll actually find blueprints scattered around the levels that will tell you exactly what you need to put together. So the good news is you don't actually have to find the blueprint to make a bunch of the stuff, which is really nice. Now, leveling and questing and crafting aside, the other aspect of the game is the survival aspect. So you do have basically gauges for 3 things: for hunger, for thirst, and for sleep. And basically, if any of those 3 go far down, your character moves significantly slower and can't sprint, and is much weaker in melee combat and things like that, and it's not as accurate. So you'll look around the islands and you'll collect food, and you'll find bottles and canisters, and you'll fill those with water that you can drink, or you'll drink from wells, and you'll hunt and you'll fish to get food. And for the most part, it's carried out relatively well. I don't think the mechanic works terribly well with this game, especially because it actually almost becomes forgotten after the first 2 islands, because your character gains skills and things like that that basically negate the need to scavenge or look at all. with the small exception that sleeping, you have to sleep inside a safe house, and so these safe houses are scattered about the islands, and you'll have to go to those and clear them out, and then you can save there and you can sleep there. Now, while I'd love to give this game a stellar review, I can't. And there's a few reasons why. The first reason is that the game seems to sort of suffer an identity crisis, because you have the main story. I'm not going to spoil anything, but you have the main story, which is relatively serious, and then you have these tutorial books that are completely not serious, to the point where you're literally, the music in the background is basically Ron Burgundy playing a flute, while some stereotypical Russian guy makes stereotypical joke things. And I'm sure that appeals to some people, but in this case I found it to be badly juvenile. Especially when you have something like this aspect of a story. So, for me, immersion in the game is totally lost by the story. Now, when I'm just playing it, I actually have a lot of fun playing the regular game. And once you get past the first 2 islands, the game becomes significantly more enjoyable and much better. The whole first part with the tutorials and all that stuff is pretty painful to get through, in my opinion. Now, second, crafting system. Okay, so while in theory the crafting system sounds awesome, it's actually not that great. And that's because the novelty of it wears off very quickly, because you will rapidly realize that there's really no incentive to killing enemies. It's really just about looking through all the nooks and crannies of each island to find highly specific items that you can use to craft specific weapons. And because you don't need blueprints, you can just go through your inventory and randomly start clicking on things and combining things, and you'll wind up with some pretty nice stuff pretty quickly. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but it could have been a really strong driving point and an addiction point for this game if there were more things that were dropped by enemies that would actually really significantly help you build rare items. And who knows, maybe there are some really rare items towards the end of the game that do require this kind of stuff, but you're pretty much only picking up ammo from your enemies and scraps of fabric. You'll have so much of these things but you will have to constantly get rid of them. And that brings me to my next point. The inventory is really small, and I still have not found a storage unit, which is very unfortunate. So you'll end up throwing away a lot of stuff or dropping a lot of stuff just to make room so that you can have certain things that you're going to need much later that are much more important, because like I said earlier, they're items scattered around the island that you need because they're specific to creating specific items. And none of these things are dropped by enemies, so you have to pick it up when you find it unless you want to backtrack. And backtracking in this game sucks because there's no fast travel outside of certain waypoints, at least at first. And then finally, the combat itself is not that great. And there's some certain things that are very unpolished, like there's a boss fight in the beginning of the game. It's supposed to be a dodging mechanic that you needed to do to help you kill this guy, but for the most part he would just get stuck on everything and it wasn't very difficult. He had too many hit points, so it was just a really long, drawn out, kind of boring fight. That being said though, once you get guns, the game is much more enjoyable. The melee weapons just don't really do it for me in this game. Part of it's because the animations are really goofy, and the fact that they decided to incorporate pretty much like kill strikes is a little irritating. You quickly start fighting all these zombies that have body armor and helmets, and you can only kill them pretty much with quick kills. It becomes really irritating when you're fighting a group of enemies, but the guns are a lot of fun and they're much more powerful, and you quickly, when you get into a big fight with a bunch of zombies and you're just mowing them down, the game is a lot of fun. So overall, after my first taste of blood with How to Survive, I wouldn't say it's a good game, but I wouldn't say it's a bad game either. And that's about it. So if you really want to play the game, I would suggest waiting for it to go on sale, and keep in mind that you're going to have to put in quite a few hours to begin with before you really get into the game and can start enjoying it. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe. Check out the links in the description if you want to help support me. I'll see you next time.